Then we'll go into the point of this webinar, which is goal-based investing. So what goal-based investing is setting up investments or an investment strategy that are based on real life goals that you have in your own life. So the first is goal-based investing means that your yardstick for success is personal. The other thing about goal-based investing is your goal is very visible and real. And then the last one is it's much easier to prioritize.
When it comes to an emergency fund, I could never say it's not important enough. It is that important.
I am Cassidy. I lead growth and marketing at Franc, a goal-based savings and investing app that's trying to make building your wealth and achieving financial freedom that much easier and more accessible. With me today and looking very podcast ready in her setup there is Jennifer. Jennifer, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay, afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Cassidy, for having me. As Cassidy has said, my name is Jennifer Nxumalo. I'm a content creator as well as a businesswoman. I was working, but now I'm currently just focusing on content creation and my business.
And the second key concept that is really important to understand when it comes to investing, and it'll come up quite a lot when we talk especially about goal-based investing, is two sides of the same investing coin, and that's risk and return. So risk in the context of investing is the chance that your money doesn't grow as you hoped or at all. And of course, none of us like to admit that that is the case or that that is something that could happen. But it is obviously something that you take on when you invest your money. And we'll go into why that's important just now. On the other side of that coin is return, and that is the gain or loss on your money. So obviously, when you invest your money, you want to have a really good, positive gain or return on your money. And generally, when we talk about risk and return, we talk about the risk-return ratio. And what that means is the lower the risk. So, for example, in a money market fund, which is all cash, very low risk, you're almost guaranteed to have your money grow over time. Also means that there's a lower expected return. So it's going to grow over time, but as you saw in that graph, it was 8.6%. Then you have your higher risk, but higher expected return. So in the case of the Satrix Top 40, for example, more than 23% was the growth over the same year, but it is slightly higher risk, which often means it goes up and down over time. So generally, when it comes to investing, you want to have a mix of both of them. Then we'll go into the point of this webinar, which is goal-based investing. So what goal-based investing is setting up investments or an investment strategy that are based on real life goals that you have in your own life. And the psychology behind this is quite interesting and is what makes it so effective. So the first is goal-based investing means that your yardstick for success is personal. So you might have somebody come to you and say, this is the next best thing. I heard about this fund. It's new on the market. You need to invest in this. You're missing out if you don't. And you're not quite sure and you're doing research, but it doesn't quite land with you. You're easily distracted by market dynamics and other investors. In the case of goal-based investing, you start with, okay, what do I want to achieve? What is my timeline on that? What does the risk profile need to do? And then you start with that as a basis to find the fund or investment products that really suit that. The other thing about goal-based investing is your goal is very visible and real. So in the case of the Franc app, for example, you set up your investment goal. You can give it a name. So I'm going to go with an example through the course of this webinar. Say I wanted to invest and be a millionaire by my 40s, for example. And then the last one is it's much easier to prioritize. So you obviously know what's really important to you right now. For some people, it might be investing for their child, for example, and we're going to go into Jennifer's actual goal in a bit. For others, it might be next year's or a holiday in 2 years' time overseas, for example, or investing in a house or a property. Whatever that is, it's very clear to you what your priority is, and that just really helps for you to then prioritize where you put whatever extra money that you have that you've allocated to saving and investing towards. The whole process of goal-based investing means your goals determine your timing, and your timing determines your risk. So, for example, if I wanted to go overseas in 2 years' time, that is very much a short-term goal. It's between the 1 to 3 year mark. That risk profile, because I want to tap into that money quite soon, needs to be very safe or safe. And that could be, for example, a money market fund. And the reason for that is it's more guaranteed, I guess, or not that it's ever guaranteed, but it's more likely to grow over time and reach that target in the timeline that I'm looking for, which is those 2 years. A medium-term goal might be something like a house deposit. I know I want to put a deposit on a house, for example, in 3 years' time. Your risk profile would still be quite safe at 3 years, and you're looking at more balanced at 5 years, and a mix of funds like part money market fund and part equities, for example. And we'll go into that in a bit. And then your long-term goals, like 5 years or 10 years. So, for example, if I'm thinking about retirement in 30 years, for example, you're looking at something a lot more bold. So you might have balance if it's 5 years. Looking at 10 years, you're very much looking at bold, which could be pure equities or an ETF. And now I'm going to hand over to Jennifer, because you've heard way too much of my voice. And she's going to tell us about a very specific goal that's obviously very close to her heart, which is her child's education.
Okay. Thank you so much, Cassidy. So as Cassidy has said, I do have a child account with the Franc app. And basically, why I actually decided that I needed to invest for my child, I think it stems from trauma, because I remember when I finished matric and I needed to go to university, my mom basically just sent me off with all the best, my daughter, nothing. Like literally there was no money that I was given to say, okay, you can go and get started. I remember when I got to university and I needed to accept the offer, and it was just a mere 500 rands. I didn't have that. And at home, they couldn't help me with that. And strangers and people that I had just known over the years were able to help me so that I can actually accept the offer to be able to study. So that for me, I can say that left a little bit of a trauma, because ever since that happened, I keep remembering that for my child, I never want them to go through that. So that's why when I had my daughter, I just told myself that I'm going to start investing for her. I want to start putting money away for her studies. Now, when I started, because I didn't have much of education when it comes to finances, I found myself doing things that I went into what they call it, an endowment, because I went with a financial institution and then they just gave me an endowment. 2 years into that, I realized that this thing was not growing. I could not see where my money was doing. I just felt like I was putting money in a bucket that has holes. So I decided after that time, I think it was 2 years, I decided that I wanted to scrap that. And then I had to look for something else. And during that time, I had been exposed to financial education. And then that's when I started looking at other platforms where I can actually invest for my daughter. And that's when I came across Franc Group. And I remember I was watching YouTube and this lady was speaking about a child account. That same night, within a few hours, I already had an account set up for my daughter. So that is basically where it stems from. Now, when it comes to the goal for my daughter, it is for her education. So obviously she's just now 8, but when I started, she was still younger than that. I think she was around 4. So now that she's 8, I know that I'm going to need this money 10 years from now. So when it comes to my goal, I'm more aggressive with the investment, because I know I'm not going to need the money now, but 10 years from now. And then when it comes to how much I needed, the nice thing about the Franc app for me, which the reason why I actually went with it, was the fact that when I went into the app, I said, this is how much money I can put in per month. And that was 500 rands that I could put in per month. And what it then did was, for me, it then calculated that if you are going to put in 500 rands per month for this period of time, how long is it going to take you? So then it was, or how much is it going to be by that time that you're going to need this money? Then it gave me how much money I'm going to need. Then that's when I kept going from there. So every year I just increase it by 10%. So then later on, I then roped in my partner to say, let's just both put in the funds there so that we can grow this fund. And then, but for me, the overall here is that I just needed to make sure that I have a fund that will set her up either for education or for anything that she might want to do when she turns 18. Maybe she might want to travel the world. She will have that fund to be able to cover her. So that is for me how I went about just investing for my daughter and basically selecting the goal, and also structuring my investment. As I said, it's more aggressive because it's long term.
Before you even think about investing and before you think about building out your investment portfolio, you need to also think about setting up an emergency fund. And we like to think of it as the champagne tower theory. Firstly, it's a very nice image. I also really love this gift. But the idea being that if the top glass is full, and that top glass essentially represents your emergency fund, then the extra money that you might have that you've allocated to saving and investing can start to trickle down into your other investment goals that you've set up based on your goal-based investing. So my question to you is your emergency fund glass full at the moment? And if it is, or if it isn't, we're still going to go over why that is so important. And the most important part of this, other than psychological safety and feeling, free to make some decisions in your life because you kind of have that financial safety net to catch you, is if big unexpected costs come up or you lose your income, you don't need to dip into your investments or go into debt. And that's really, really important because especially if you have a long-term investment set up, you don't want to have to dip into that, especially if it's a higher risk one. And you're growing it over time for your future. If you have an emergency like a washing machine breaking or your car breaking down or you losing a job, for example. So emergency fund is incredibly important. When it comes to an emergency fund, we have 3 kind of golden rules that we always advocate for that we find makes it easier just to wrap your head around. So the first is how much you should have. And we always advocate for 1 to 3 months expenses saved. Expenses specifically, not income, because the idea being that if for whatever reason you might have lost your job, what are the core expenses you'd need to cover in those months that you then have it saved and invested in your emergency fund? If you are self-employed, so an entrepreneur or freelancer or anything like that, we recommend slightly more, obviously because job or work is not as stable as it is when you're full-time employed, and it gives you a little bit more of a safety net to work with. In terms of where you keep your emergency fund, we advocate for a high growth, easily accessible place. High growth because you obviously want that money to do some work while it's saved away. The idea is that you don't touch your emergency fund until you actually have an emergency, but you don't want it to sit idle. We've spoken about the idea of beating inflation. You don't want to just put that money away and not have it grow. So you want it to grow. But you also want to have it in an easily accessible place. And something that we've spoken a lot with people about is you don't want to put it in a fixed deposit, for example, that has a notice period of, a month, for example, because if you have an emergency, you have an emergency right now and you need that money and you need to access it.
When it comes to an emergency fund, I could never say it's not important enough. It is that important because it is that one fund that will give you the power to decide whether you want to stay in a toxic job like I was or you want to leave. And also, when you start building up emergency funds, you also get an idea of how long it will take for you to actually be able to take that decision. So for me, what inspired me, or basically what got me going when it comes to building up my emergency fund, is the debt that I found myself in. So when my emergency fund a few years ago, I would say when I started out in my career, 2017 up until 2019, my emergency fund was just banks. And that is because that is what I've known growing up, and also my friends and the people that were close to me. All of us, we just knew that if you needed money, you just go to the bank. If there's something that has happened, you go to the bank. So I found myself with high credit. I also found myself with a hefty personal loan. And that for me, then I realized that it was difficult for me to meet my monthly needs because majority of my mind was going towards servicing the debt and not into the things that I needed in order for me to live a decent life. Then I decided that I needed to change things around.
So I see that there were a few questions around, for example, I think it was Dorian who mentioned that they wanted to be a millionaire in their 40s. I love that is a goal. I think it's a ambitious but a very good goal to have. And I'm glad you say that, because that's exactly the example that we're going to go through now. So when it comes to setting up an investment goal, that is where Franc really sets you up. So most of our goals, or our products in the app, are goal based. And that means it starts with what you want to invest or save towards. And then you kind of build out from that. So I'm going to take you through exactly how that happens, and how that works. And hopefully that also just puts all the goal-based investing theory that we've just spoken about into actual practice. So the first thing you're going to get when you land on the dashboard, after you click on Start Here, which is hopefully everyone's first port of call, is whether you want to save or invest. And for the sake of this webinar, we're obviously talking about goal-based investing and not saving. So we're going to actually go for an investment goal. And once you go to investment goal, the app is going to just go through the steps very quickly. And it's a 3-step process. And then we're going to get to what are you investing towards. Sorry about that. It's jumped ahead. And when you go to what you're investing towards, that's where you really put a label on what you're investing for. So in this case, if we want to be a millionaire in our 40s, we're going for wealth. If we're going towards a target, we're putting in R1 million as our target. We're going to say in 10 years' time, so 2035, for example, and it's going to tell us what the recommended strategy is. And you'll see that it says bold there. And you can toggle between monthly, weekly, annually, once off. I wanted to go with monthly, and that means we'd have to deposit 5,000 Rand. The beauty of this is that you can really play around. So you can see, if you have a specific target and you put in your amount, how much you want to invest towards and what your timeline is, it tells you how much you need to invest towards. But I think Jennifer actually might have mentioned this earlier when it came to an emergency fund. She knew how much she had to save towards her emergency fund. So you can choose to deposit regularly, say that's 500 Rand, for example, and it will then show you exactly how much that will grow over 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 years, if you continuously deposit and invest that money. The next part of it is investment strategies. So you noticed that when you asked, when you inputted R1 million as your target amount, and you said you wanted to get to that target by 10 years, it gave a bold strategy. And that's hopefully something that makes sense to you now when we talk about risk profiles matching timelines. 10 years is long term, and that means you go bold. What you can do, however, is, and we really recommend that you explore it. Obviously, the recommended is based on your timeline, and that's really matching your risk to your timeline. But explore what the different options are. So this is just a quick walkthrough of some of the different risk profiles. So when you click on edit, you can toggle between very safe, balanced, bold. You can even make a custom one, for example. And these are combinations of the different types of funds. So money market fund, a local equity fund, which is a Satrix Top 40 ETF, and an offshore equity fund, which is the Signiatrix S&P 500. And it's the combination of these, as you can see here, that makes up the different risk profiles. So when it comes to very safe, you're going to have 100% money market. It's a very low risk investment. As soon as you get to balanced, you have kind of an even split of money market and equity, and local and offshore equity, for example. Here is an example of you actually toggling or customizing your investment strategy for yourself. And you can see you can play around with the different cash and local and offshore equity to find a risk profile that really works for you. So now you've set up your investment based on your goal. For example, on the Franc app, you've hopefully covered or set up your emergency fund. And you've budgeted, and that's a whole different webinar that we definitely are going to do in future, which is budgeting to save and invest. But say you have budgeted to save and invest, and you have that money allocated that you know that you want to save and invest every month or every week or once off, however it might be. How do you even go about allocating these funds? So this is very much a guideline. As we've spoken about before, when it comes to goal-based investing, your goals generally do tend to help you prioritize, because you know very innately and intuitively what is most important to you. This is generally a guideline also based on that champagne tower theory that we believe is a really good approach when it comes to allocating your money. So the first one is to aim for 20% of your income going towards saving and investing. So this we talk about being budgeting to save and invest. And it follows the 50-30-20 rule. 50% going to your must-have expenses, 30% going to your nice-to-have expenses, and then 20% of your income going towards saving and investing. This is, for some people, quite a lofty and ambitious goal, but it's a goal. So it's something to definitely aim towards if investing towards financial freedom is something that's really important to you.